Hello, Awana family. This is Pastor Carlos with this week's Counsel Time. As we work our way through Paul's letter to the Ephesians, we come to the topic of the family. This is a very relevant and practical book, is it not? Paul is clearly concerned about the family, and he seeks to minister helpful truth so that the family might function in a God-exalting, gospel-centered manner. As we know, Paul front-loads his letter with gospel truth. Only after providing gospel truth does Paul call his readers to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, to walk in a Christ-like manner, to walk in love, to walk in light, and to walk in wisdom. And then in chapter 5, verse 22, all the way through chapter 6, verse 4, Paul addresses the family. He provides instruction to wives, husbands, children, and fathers. Today, we will begin by considering Paul's instruction to wives. Let us begin by reading chapter 5, verses 22 through 24, and then jumping ahead to verse 33. Ephesians 5, 22 through 24 reads, "Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything." Paul then addresses husbands before returning again to wives in verse 33b. "And let the wife see to it that she respect her husband." I am entitling my message, Paul's instruction to wives. We will consider two instructions Paul gives to wives to help marriages function in the way God designs. Let us begin with instruction number 1. Wives are to submit to their husbands. The passage reads, "Wives, be subject to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything." I am going to break this command down into 6 separate parts for our consideration. First, consider the command, "Wives, be subject to your own husbands." Wives are to arrange themselves under the leadership of their husbands. This is put forth as a present tense command. Thus, wives are called to obey this command. Be subject to your own husbands. But this does not mean that wives are to blindly follow their husbands if and when their husbands want them to act wrongly. No wife is to follow her husband into sin. We see this with the second consideration. Second, consider the manner as to the Lord. Wives are to be subject to their husbands as to the Lord. Later, Paul commands husbands to love their wives just as Christ loves the church. We will unpack this more next lesson. But clearly, husbands are to be as Christ to their wives. And in our text today, we learn that wives are to submit to their husbands as to the Lord. The wife's submission serves as an act of worship to the Lord. Her submission serves as an act of service to her God. And when the wife submits to her husband, and when the husband loves his wife as Christ loves the church, we have a beautiful marriage. Third, consider the reason wives are to be subject to their husbands. The text says, "For the husband is head of the wife." This is God's design. To be the head implies leadership. The body needs the head. The body does not know what to do without the head. The body cannot function without the head. Similarly, the marriage relationship functions properly when the wife rightly relates to her husband. She is to submit to her husband, who is the head. There is a sense in which she receives direction and guidance from her head, and she is to submit to her husband because he is her head. Fourth, consider the example of headship. The text says, as Christ also is head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. The ultimate example of headship is Christ himself. As head, Christ directs and guides the body. Not only that, but he laid down his life for the body. He sacrificed himself for his bride, the church. Such love should serve as reason the body submits to Christ. Again, the text says, Christ is the Savior. This reminds us that Christ died on a cross for his body. Such sacrificial love should motivate the body to submit to Christ. Even so, the example of Christ informs how the husband exercises headship. And having considered headship, we arrive at our fifth consideration. Fifth, consider the example of submission. We read in the text, as the church is subject to Christ, the wife's submission to her husband is to reflect the church's submission to Christ. There must be order in relationships. The church submits to Christ and the wife submits to her husband. And this brings us to our final consideration. Sixth, consider the conclusion. Paul says, so also wives ought to be subject to their husbands in everything. As a general rule, wives are to submit to the leadership of their husbands in everything. This does not mean she is to obey him when he wants her to sin. Of course not. But assuming the husband is leading and loving well, the wife must submit. Sometimes the husband may lead in a direction that the wife questions. She should feel free to respectfully ask questions, but at the end of the day, the wife must honor her husband's leadership and submit to what he believes the Lord is leading him and his family to do. In short, the first command given to wives is to be subject to their husbands. We have considered the command, the manner, the reason, the example of headship, and the example of submission, and then the conclusion. So we now turn to the second instruction given by Paul to help marriages function in the way God designs. Instruction number 2. Wives are to respect their husbands. Respect. And we see this in verse 33b. And let the wife see to it that she respect her husband. Wives are to respect their husbands. This carries the idea of showing reverence or honor. Her reverent disposition serves as an act of reverence to the Lord himself. The text does not say that the wife is to respect or honor her husband when he is respectable or honorable. No, the wife is to respect and honor her husband even if he is being a bit of a bonehead. No husband is perfect, and his imperfection is no reason for the wife not to respect her husband. Lord willing, the husband is acting in a respectable and honorable way. That makes it easier for the wife to respect him. Nevertheless, she is commanded here to respect him even when he falls short of loving her in a Christ-like way. We have considered 2 instructions given by Paul to help marriages function in the way God designs. And these instructions given to women include submission and respect. Wives are to submit to their husbands as to the Lord, and wives are to respect their husbands. Next week, we will focus on the husbands. Until then, thank you for listening, and may the Lord greatly bless each and every single one of you.